this is Dr. Patrick Hu. We're very happy today to have with us the recent awardees of funding from the George Edgecomb Society. So Moffitt's George Edgecomb Society, which goal is to level the playing field for cancer disparities. We have here Dr. Mo Malafa, who's in gastrointestinal oncology, a surgical oncologist. We have Dr. Lauren Perez, who's in cancer epidemiology, and we have Dr. Michael Schell, who's in biostatistics and bioinformatics. Welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you. Dr. Hu.
Wonderful. Why don't we just start with talking about cancer health disparities? Tell us what that is and why it's so important to study.
So cancer health disparities occurs when there are differences in cancer burden, or it can be other cancer outcome measures like survival that differ for certain population groups. And that can be defined by race and ethnicity, income, education, sexual orientation, geographic location, etc. And it's so important to study disparities because we know that there are differences according to incidence, mortality, survival by these different population groups. And we need to better understand why there are these disparities so that we can improve outcomes in these populations.
All right, thanks, Dr. Perez. Dr. Malafa, can you talk about your grant in colorectal cancer with the George Edgecomb Society?
So Dr. Schell and I applied to study the impact of aspirin on patients who have been diagnosed and treated for colorectal cancer. We had observed in some preliminary studies that aspirin use can actually protect people from developing relapse from colorectal cancer, and so could improve survival of colorectal cancer. And so we are looking in depth into those that use aspirin and those that don't. And we're trying to do a very rigorous analysis as to, does aspirin really confer benefit? So that's what the work is all about.
Great, thank you. Dr. Schell, you're part of this work too. Can you tell us about your role in these exciting studies?
Well, so my role on the project is to be a statistician, which means the numbers guy. That I help with the clinician, Dr. Malafa, to sort out these findings. But what we think is going on is the aspirin use that the patients had prior to getting colon cancer may have actually allowed them to have a lower stage of disease. And so some of the stage of disease is actually owing to the aspirin use. And so that's where, you know, a kind of a more fancy statistical thinking and argumentation is needed to understand how some factors, some exposures have what are called direct effects and indirect effects. The indirect effect may be where it helps the cancers to grow slower in such a way that they're more treatable.
Great, thanks. Dr. Perez, you also received funding from the George Edgecomb Society. What's your project about?
Sure, so my project was focused on racial disparities in ovarian cancer survival. And so Black women with ovarian cancer have about a 10% lower 5-year relative survival rate compared to non-Hispanic white women. And we really don't know why that is, but the disparity cannot be entirely explained by differences in treatment or access to care. So we're trying to look at other things. So some of our findings show that there are actually distinct tumor DNA methylation patterns associated with survival in Black women. And we identified in particular a few genes related to ascites and cell motility that were differentially DNA methylated that were associated with a lower risk of mortality in Black women. So we're also currently working on trying to expand our sample size so we can include a direct comparison of Black to white women so that we can further disentangle the relationships and the associations that we're seeing here.
The funding from the George Edgecomb Society is so important because this allows a seed funding for these projects, these very exciting projects that can go on to get very large federal grants and other grants. So it's really very important. This philanthropy is very important for this work to level the playing field. Dr. Perez, you want to touch upon that?
Of course. So like you said, it is extremely important. The George Edgecomb Society grant that I have has actually been used, the preliminary data from that to then apply for federal level funding. And I'm currently waiting on my score now to see, but without the funding from the George Edgecomb Society, this work would not have been possible, and I would not have been able to generate the preliminary data needed to then go on to apply for these larger federal grants.
Wonderful. I think it speaks to the importance of Moffitt's George Edgecomb Society and the funding that can take these hints in colorectal cancer, ovarian cancer, and try to mature these data so that we can level the playing field for these diseases. All right. Well, Doctors Shell, Malafa, and Perez, thank you so much for being here today, and congratulations again on your research that's funded by Moffitt's George Edgecomb Society.